All right, gentlemen, we gathered together today because Bezrat Hashem, I wanted to give a shiur for a while. One of the most important things that we have in halacha, one of the most important things that we have when it comes to you as a Jew, is the Jewish calendar. I mean, literally, the oldest piece of Torah Shebaal Peh that we have written, called Megillas Tanit, is a calendar. Because for a Jew, you want to know what you're supposed to do every day of the year, what your responsibilities are, what your minhagim are, and the way to do that is to have the Jewish calendar. Now, assuming we're not getting into topics of minhag, and we're not getting into topics which are not min haTorah, right? The Torah defines for us that the Jewish calendar is dependent upon one thing, and that's the Jewish people. It's an amazing thing that Kiddush Baruch Hu gave you. So what we're going to talk about, the most important aspect of all of halacha as far as we're concerned. No, I don't think that's bothering me anymore. I guess one of the most important part of the Jewish calendar is obviously the moon. Okay, we follow basically a lunar calendar, but Kiddush Baruch Hu, for his own reasons, decided that we, in order to be able to properly keep the Torah, we not only have to follow the lunar calendar, we have to follow the solar calendar. This is called the luni-solar calendar. And amazingly enough, I give an entire shiur on the topics, by the way, I have an entire shiur that I give, a lecture on the topics of time and time concepts and where they come from. It's amazing, the more investigation you do in the secular world, the more you see that they understand zero, nothing. It's like, where does a 24-hour day come from? Let me give you an idea. Well, see, day is about 12 hours, and night is about 12 hours. That's wonderful. And why is a day 12 hours? So one answer that I love quoting is, well, see, you have 4 fingers, and each one has 3, parts to it, so that's 12, right? This is literally, if I'm not mistaken, Oxford University on their website lists this as the reason why you have 12 hours in a day, okay? That is what happens when you have a tenured professor who says, if I don't produce something, they're going to fire me, so at least there'll be something there, even if it's ridiculous, okay? But the real aspect is, what we're really learning about is the Rosh Chodesh and the Luach Ivri. It's the most important part of our entire calendar. Bezrat Hashem, pretty soon we're going to have Purim. Purim has a set time in the calendar. More important than Purim, because Purim is B'Darabanan, comes a month later, which is Pesach. Okay? Now, Pesach is absolutely, positively dependent upon one thing, one Rosh Chodesh is. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, all of the mitzvahs that you find in these days of the year, which are all min Torah, are dependent upon one thing. When Beis Din is going to do Kiddush Hachodesh, when Beis Din is going to establish that today is the first day of the month. And therefore, we need to figure out we need to understand what the problems are behind them, and we need to see what Chazal did in order to solve them, okay? Now, obviously, the most important part is, obviously here we are on planet Earth, and you have the moon, and you have the sun, right? Basically, what you're going to see over there, we'll see this in a little bit more detail later, is this is what Rosh Chodesh kind of looks like, in that we see the moon in its blackness. We don't see this moon reflecting any light, and therefore, as far as we're concerned, that's the beginning of the month. Okay? Now, the Torah tells us about this at the beginning of Sefer Bereshis. Right? Hashem created from day one a situation where we have things in the sky where their job is not only to make day and night, but also to separate between day and night. They also have a job called Vayula Otot. I'm sorry, jumping ahead. Right? Vayula Otot. There's supposed to be signs. L'moadim, says Rashi, Shlosh Regalim. Le'amim l'shanim. They establish exactly what days are, what years are, and therefore they're very important. Okay, that's already from day one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu established this. I just want to take an aside for a second. The pasuk says, "Vayomer Elohim." It's kind of a little hard to see. Yehi ma'orot b'rakia shamayim. I discussed this in the Amunah shiur for those of you Shana Aleph that were there. What is the meaning of that pasuk? The meaning of that pasuk is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu originally created the world, there were 2 suns. Okay, and this is something that's interesting. Hashem, for whatever reason, changed that. And why he changed that, a whole topic unto itself. You have the famous Midrash Chazal that Rashi brings on there about the moon that complained. How can two kings rule over the same country at the same time? And therefore Hashem said, good idea, go make yourself smaller. We're not getting into that. But Rosh Chodesh is special. That Midrash, by the way, is the only thing that explains why Rosh Chodesh is the only quasi-festival where we have a korban chatat that's brought. Right? The Torah establishes that out of all the Moadim, this one, Rosh Chodesh, every Rosh Chodesh in the Beit HaMikdash, they would bring a korban chatat, a sin offering, And the sin offering was brought for who? Says the Midrash, for Hashem, because I made the moon small. In any case, let's continue. Right? That's what's going to happen, and effectively what we're going to have is, because we now have a sun and a moon, and we have to deal with both the sun and the moon in order to establish our calendar, therefore we have to deal with their orbits, and not only their orbits, but assuming the Earth revolves around itself, which is the classic scientific explanation today, how fast that makes things change as well. All these things factor in to how long is a month, how long is a year, and their relevance for us in establishing a calendar. Right? All of this is lahadil ben hayom ben halayla, vayila otot moavim v'yamim v'shamim, as the pasuk said. Okay? This is basically the explanation of those various things, but we already mentioned them quickly, and again, I don't want to take too much time. In any case, back to the Yilron Berkei Shamayim, La'ir al Aretz. Hashem wanted them to shine on the land. Vayichen. That's what happened. Okay. So Hashem makes the Shnei Marot Gedolim. I didn't realize. I thought I took this part out. We'll just look at it quickly. Interesting, fascinating explanation which Chazal bring to this. There are two suns in the sky. What changed? So Chazal tell us that the moon went in. Okay, I bring the whole thing here, so we'll just bring it down. Right? It became, for some reason, Ma'or Gadol, Ma'or Katon, and the stars. That's what happened afterwards as a result. This is the famous midrash of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, which Rashi mentions, right, where Hashem says to the moon, Hashem says to the moon, Lechi ma'ati etzmech, go make yourself smaller, and therefore, since that point in time, we have a small moon relative to the earth, relative to the sun. Now, what happens, say Chazal, this is a midrash which I bring down in the book, but amazingly enough, there's something called the Rashi lobe effect. And what happens when this happens, right, here you have two large luminous bodies. One has a larger mass than the other. And what happens is that it's sucking, right? You see that little cone shape over there? It's sucking all of the, we'll call it sunniness for lack of a better word. It's going to suck it out, and this is going to become a star, and this is going to be left as a burnt out star core. Again, we want to read about where the moon comes from, which is a very interesting scientific explanation today. They have wonderful science fiction about it, as opposed to the Torah, which tells us that is what became the moon, and it explains all the weird phenomena which science can't explain. Anyway, moving on. I don't want to get it. So Hashem places them in the Rakia Hashemayim, La'ir al Aretz, Mushol B'yom V'Layla. They became rulers over the day and the night. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the Chodesh. We all know this from a couple of parshas ago. All of these things teach us something about the Jewish calendar. One is that it's weird. We're the only calendar, to my knowledge, that start counting month one in the middle of the year, as opposed to every other, January is the first month of the year. Everywhere else, that's how they do it. It makes a lot of sense, but we start from Nisan. Why do we start from Nisan? Because as far as we're concerned, the first month is connected to when we first became a people. It's connected to Eretz Mitzrayim. And really, all of the mitzvahs that we do, almost throughout the entire year, is Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's fundamental for us. And therefore, because it's so fundamental, it became fundamental in the counting of the months themselves. Okay, now obviously this is all, the aspects of the Chodesh Hazelachem is relevant as far as the rotation of the moon by around the earth. Now, what we see over here, you notice that there's a little arrow over there, and that's because the moon is locked. It doesn't revolve at all. Okay, the face that we see of the moon is always the same face, which is why science was always wondering what's the dark side of the moon look like. And when we finally had a lunar landing, on the other side, they finally, for the first time in history, were able to see what the other side of the moon looks like, because we never see it. What we always see is the same face. Now what happens? What's a month? So it's dependent upon this. But as you see, the Earth has its own speed of rotation, and the Moon has its own speed of rotation. And when you compare them, what you find out is as follows. The average lunar month is about 29 and a half days, but that's not precise. Okay, if we're exactly 29 and a half days, it's very easy to make a calendar. What do? 1 month of 29 days, 1 month of 30 days, problem solved, right? No problem. The problem is it's a little bit more than that. And because it's a little bit more than that, every rotation of the moon adds up. Every time the moon has a rotation, every time we have a new Rosh Chodesh, the moon isn't exactly where it was before. It changes. it's always adding on more decimal points, and those decimal points eventually add up. So what happens is we have two issues. Okay, on the one hand, in order to make calculations, we have something called the Molad HaMemutza. Molad HaMemutza means the average lunar month. Okay, basically what do? You record 12 months or 24 months or however you want to do of how long it takes. You divide the total number by the total amount of months. You get the average. Okay? Now, amazingly enough, the average that Chazal give us is fantastically precise. It's a very important point to bring out. Right? Hachodesh Hazeh, first and foremost, what does it look like? Okay? Once upon a time, in the times of the Mikdash, Mehera Yabana, when they would do Kiddush Hachodesh, it was a very simple process effectively. They did it, as the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says, they used Eidim that came to Beis Din and they testified, I saw the new moon. So based on that testimony, you come along and you say, Mekudesh, 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 it's now Rosh Chodesh. So once I know when Rosh Chodesh is, I know when Pesach is, I know when Purim is, I know when Chanukah is, I know when Rosh Hashanah is, I know when Yom Kippur is, I know all the important dates of the Jewish year with all of their halachas are known now. Okay? All of that is dependent upon one thing, when Beis Din says it's Mekudesh. Which is for that reason we say, right, when it comes to the Hachodesh Lachem, Chazal say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu exactly what it looks like, as quoted in the Rambam. And when we get to Tefillas on Rosh Hashanah, what you discover is we say as follows. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Why do we say Mekadesh Yisrael first? Anybody? Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim.
They're the ones who are going to be Mekadesh as well.
Exactly, because until Am Yisrael comes along and says today's Rosh Chodesh, it's not Rosh Chodesh. Hashem gave that over to the Sanhedrin. Amazingly enough, there's a Rashba that says as follows, right? Chazal will give us a rule, give us a halach l'Moshe Sinai, that a young girl who's a virgin, if she would for whatever reason lose her virginity before the age of 3, doesn't matter, it'll grow back. Says the Rashba, so when does that happen? Once 3 years from her birth have passed. But guess what? If Rosh Chodesh is pushed off by 1 day, says the Rashba, that will change the physical reality that this girl experiences. Okay, just because Chazal decided it 3 years haven't passed yet. Okay, that's an amazing thing that he says. And as opposed to that, on Shabbat, we don't say something like that. We say Mekadesh Shabbat. Why do we say only Mekadesh Shabbat? Because that has nothing to do with us. From Bereshis already, Hashem said today's Shabbos, it's Shabbos. It doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Okay. The process of the moon, right, this is basically a good illustration of how the Chodesh goes. Okay, what makes the difference between what we see during the course of the month is dependent upon the moon and its relative axis as opposed to the sun. Okay, now this is a little bit better. Right, he gives you the example of the sun's position as opposed to the earth's position as opposed to the moon's position, and that's exactly what you're going to see on Earth from the position that it's at. Okay, during the first quarter of the moon. Various names that they gave it. Okay, so that's Rosh Chodesh. After Rosh Chodesh, though, we come out, we have to figure out a year as well. What's a year? So a year is roughly 1 year of 12 months, which are 29 and a half days, is a grand total of 354 days. Okay, now obviously those of you that know a little bit deeper know that the solar year is longer. How much longer is it? 365. But it's also not exactly 365, by the way. Okay? When we're talking about the lunar year, let me give you an example of what Chazal say and how precise it is. Alright, the Gemara says as follows in the Seder Shana. Pam echad nitkashu shamayim ba'avim. It got cloudy. V'nirit hut levana ba'asrim v'tisha l'chodesh. And people thought that they saw the moon behind the clouds on the 29th. Everybody thought it was Rosh Chodesh, and they wanted to do Kiddush Hachodesh. Comes along Rabban Gamliel, and he says as follows, right, this is what I received as a Kabbalah Mibeit Abba from my grandfather, meaning the average lunar month is not less, it's not Chutam Esrim V'Tisha Yom, Umetza, 29 and a half days, that's nice. V'Shnei Shlishei Shah, another 2/3 of an hour, V'Ayin Gimel Chalakim. Okay, that's very precise. How many Chalakim do we have in an hour? You guys know? Chalakim.
1,000?
A little bit more. 1,080. Okay? So he says, out of that you have Ayin Gimel Chalakim, right? It's not 73 out of 1,080 possible chalakim. So, what are we talking about here? Let's put that into numbers that we understand. Okay, so let's do the math. 29 and a half days, 29 and a half. Shnei Shlishei Shah, right? So if you're time, let's change it first into chalakim. I'm sorry, 1,080 in an hour, not in a day. Yeah, no. Okay, so you're going to change that into chalakim. That equals 720 chalakim, right? 2/3 of an hour times that is 720 chalakim. You add on the extra 72 chalakim, you get a grand total of 793 chalakim. So, of an hour, that turns out, let's do the math, 793 divided by 1,080 comes out to 0.73425 parts of an hour. That means nothing to you, right? Okay, fine, let's move a little bit further. Let's change that into a day. How much of a day is that? Okay, so if we take that number and divide it by how many hours in a day? 12 hours in a day. Okay, I'm sorry, 24 hours in a day, it becomes 0.734425. So if you add that together with the 29 and a half, so what do you get? The average in our numbers is 29.53059. Okay? Rabban Gamliel said if he was using our mathematics and not the mathematics of Chazal, that the average lunar month is 29.53059, or 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds. Now,
He calculates it to that exact.
how exact is that? That's the question. So here. NASA, is that a good source? Okay. So they're right over here in nasa.gov. The mean length of the synodic month, which is the average month, is 29.53059 days. Now, in order to get that number, they didn't do mathematics like we do. They actually tracked the moon with lasers. And they did it for, I think, 10 years. And after doing that, they sat down and they made the calculations, and they came up with the calculations. Now, Chazal's calculation is just too precise. There are many ancient nations that also tried to figure out the average and were way off. I mean, obviously 29 and a half is clear. There, you have no argument. That's pretty clear. But the rest of it was way off, and nobody comes this close. Okay? And this isn't this close. This is precise. This is exact. So what happens is as follows. Whenever you're talking about a month goes by, so you always have these 0.03059, which is adding on constantly. Okay, which means that in reality, if a month goes by and I look up in the sky, I'm not, if a month ago it was here, I'm not going to see it here. Now I'm going to see the moon over here. Then I'm going to see the moon over there. And then I'm going to see the moon over there. Every time the moon changes in relation to the planet, what happens? You're going to see it as fuller or less full. Okay, because again, it's all dependent upon the sun bouncing off the moon and the moon bouncing it back to us and how we see it. And that's going to define when the next Rosh Chodesh is. So in reality, Rosh Chodesh is changing all the time. It's not this precise number. It changes all the time as far as we're concerned. So every single month that goes by, you're running into a problem. Rosh Chodesh is getting further and further away. So what do you have to do? You have to fix it. How do you fix it? Add a day. Right? Not necessarily leap year. Leap year we'll get to in a second, but that's relative to the solar year. But you add a day every so often, okay? Eventually this adds up to a day, close to a day. Add a day, problem solved, right? Okay, fine. That's problem one. So, then you have the issue of the two tkufot, right? We said that you have the solar year and you have the lunar year. So this is the relative, again, this is the modern understanding of the solar system, and the year is defined exactly by one revolution of the Earth around the sun. So therefore, how long does that take? So it takes 365.25 days. Now, because it's 0.25, what happens every 4 years in the regular secular calendar? Add a day, right? The problem is it's also not 0.25. It's 0.25, like 15 numbers afterwards. And science has a problem, because it's the same problem that we have by the lunar year, just that the solar year changes very slightly all the time. So basically, there's an argument among scientists today. What do you do when all of those little pieces add up to a day? And there's all sorts of interesting arguments. Add a day to the calendar. There'll be a non-day in the calendar, right? It'll just like be nothing day, right? It's not June, it's not July. It's just like somewhere in between, right? How to fix the calendar, that's a big question. Now, amazingly enough, this is a fantastic book, okay? I got it as a present from my father, who got it from a present from somebody else. My father is a Baal Tshuva. This wasn't for him. He says, you take it, maybe you'll learn it. Now, amazingly enough, if you open up the book, it was written by a guy named Rachamim Sar Shalom. This book is totally handwritten. Okay? The entire thing, he literally, you guys don't know what they are, but once upon a time there's a thing called a stencil. And a stencil was what preceded the Xerox machine, right, the copy machine. And literally the guy drew this by hand, every single page, but it is a thorough explanation of the entire topic of Luach HaIvri. And I started reading it, and I was like blown away. Now he tells us that the Jewish calendar, now obviously we have a working functional calendar today. He says that, page 51 I believe, I marked it off, yeah, here it is. He says that the Jewish calendar is so precise that another 689,472 years can go by and we will have no problems whatsoever with this calendar. We don't need to play with the math, we don't need to do anything. That's how precise the calendar is, right? This is like mind-blowing. The secular calendar, as opposed to that, every 100 years is going to run into problems. They're going to have to figure out what to do. Okay, just an idea. So we're dealing with two calendars that are working simultaneously, and we have to figure out how to balance them out. Now, the difference between this and the solar year, right, is a grand total of 11.2 days. Okay, which means that a year, 12 months of the lunar year go by, so it's 354 days. 12 months of the secular calendar go by, it's 365 days. The difference is 11.2 days. Every year we're losing 11.2 days. Now the Arabs don't care about that. Right? You ever met the Arabs in the month of Ramadan? It could be in the middle of winter, it could be in the middle of summer. They just follow purely lunar calendar. They don't have this problem. Okay? But we do. Why do we have this problem? For this reason. Right? Hashem says, Shmor Chodesh Aviv. You have to guard the month of Aviv. Right? By the way, what does the word Aviv mean? Well, yeah, it means spring, but in the Torah it doesn't mean spring. What does the month of Aviv mean? Aviv means the month of growth. Okay? Where do we learn this from? Think, you guys learned recently Makat Barat, right? Barat. The hailstones fell down. And it said, they were destroyed. Why? Ki ha-saora aviv, I'm sorry, ki ha-chita aviv ve-ha-saora giv'ol. Right? The wheat was destroyed, but the barley wasn't, because the wheat was more fully grown. It was aviv. Okay, and it reached a state where it was actually already called food, as opposed to the Sarah, which hadn't reached that stage yet, and therefore it wasn't destroyed. Okay, but the Torah says Pesach has to come out in the spring. It has to come out at the time when things grow, and that means since that cycle is entirely dependent upon the solar cycle, we have to make them work together. Okay, now again, when the Beis HaMikdash was around, they didn't have this problem. Why? Because the Beis HaMikdash is around, Sanhedrin decide when to do Kiddush Hachodesh. They have the ability to play with things. They could accept or reject the Eidim that came. They could see based on all sorts of simanim. For example, I don't know, you guys can't see this. I planted a lemon tree in my garden a couple of years ago. And right now when I go outside, the thing is flowering like crazy, right? No, it wasn't too far ago, it wasn't too long ago. The thing about Tu B'Shvat is that's the time that all the trees that are going to grow fruit start flowering. Right? We say by Pesach, Hashkeri Aporachat, Hashem B'Shlozarachat. You've heard that song, right? You all had some Zionism in your life when you were kids. You must have heard that from your ganenet, from your kindergarten teacher, right? Shkeria is what? Almond tree, right? Almond trees. By the way, Rashi says, where are almonds mentioned in the Chumash?
Aaron's staff.
Aaron's staff. Right? What does Rashi say? Why was it specifically almonds that grew? You forget. Okay, fine. Rashi says that almonds are the fastest growing fruit. Okay? Therefore, they're the first ones to flower. And really, if you go around, anytime you see a flowering tree, like real flowers, in all likelihood it's an almond tree. Right? They have them all over the country and the So in other words, you see this happening. It's flowering like crazy. That's because the sap is being drawn into the tree in a very powerful way at this point in time. Right? The water has saturated the ground to the extent that the trees are drawing in the water, and they're starting to flower and they're starting to produce fruits. And that's the signs that Aviv, that spring is coming. And Chazal used this in order to figure out two things. Number one, how far away is Chodesh Aviv? Is it springtime now or is it not springtime? Number two is, they then had to figure out, are we making a leap year this year or not? Because in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, there was no set calendar. It was all dependent upon the Sanhedrin and the Beis HaMikdash. So, for those of us that like having a calendar, tough luck. right? Meheri Yabana Beit HaMikdash, as far as scheduling your appointments and stuff like that, it's going to be a little bit different, right? You think you know when Purim is? We're going to push it off by a month whenever we feel it's appropriate. That's the reality. Okay, when Meheri Yabana Beit HaMikdash, we're going to go back to doing Kiddush Hachodesh by means of Eidos, by means of Re'iyah, like we're supposed to be doing it. But that's the times of the Mikdash. What happens though when you don't have a Sanhedrin anymore? Right? And that's really the problem that we encounter. Okay, up until now we're saying it's all balancing out the solar calendar and the lunar calendar. What happens when the Sanhedrin is gone? What happens when you have nobody to say, Mekudesh, Mekudesh? Now what do? So the answer is, right, this is what the Rambam writes in Hilchot Kiddush Hachodesh, that there was a guy named Hillel Hasheni. Okay, Hillel Hasheni lived at the beginning of the times of the Babylonian Talmud, who saw that this was going to be a real problem. He saw that the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael, is the only place you can do Kiddush Hachodesh, are being destroyed, they're being chased after by the Romans, and they realized that there's going to be a big problem here, because if something happens to the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael, Jews all over the world are going to have to figure out how to make their calendars. They're going to have to live their Jewish life according to the Jewish calendar, and guess what's going to happen? You will go to Turkey and it'll be Yud Dalet Nisan. And you'll go from Turkey to Italy and it'll be Yud Gimel Nisan. You'll have Jews all over the world keeping the same festivals on entirely different times, and that's not possible. Right? The Jewish people needs to appear to ourselves, if not to everybody else, as a unified people. So in order to do that, just like they standardized the Mishnah, they standardized the Gemara, they standardized a calendar. Okay, Hillel Hasheni came along and he said, we need to make an established calendar. The Rambam's explanation is that Hillel Hasheni said, we are going to do Kiddush Hachodesh for all of the months from now until the time that Mashiach comes. And that was the establishment of the basic Jewish calendar. Now, I'm not getting into all the details because I don't want to go on too long. This book is a fantastic book for those of you that are patient. It's obviously in Hebrew. And since it's handwritten and it's also designed in such a very interesting way. I mean, you see some of these designs, some of them are like, let me give you an example. The guy was a mad genius, okay? These are all calculations about how to figure out the month. The first chapter here is probably the most important because in it he describes how the Jewish calendar was developed. Because you know what? The details that we follow today were not necessarily known at the time of Hillel Hasheni. The reality is, it seems to be, and he brings proof to say it, that up until the times of the Gaonim, the fine details weren't established. For example, we have rules, right? Lo adu rosh. Do you ever hear that statement? Lo adu rosh. What does lo adu rosh mean? It means that Rosh Hashanah can't fall out on adu. What are the days called adu? Aleph is Sunday, Dalet is Wednesday, and Vav is Friday. Okay, so if any time you see in your calculations that Rosh Hashanah is going to fall out on any of the days, what do? You push it off to the next day. Now all of these tiny little calendars, all these tiny little examples, there's other rules, again, I'm going to bore you with the details, are there for one reason. In order to help everybody keep the exact same calendar, and at the same time keep it balanced with the solar and the lunar months. Okay? That was a tremendous, tremendous undertaking. It took a couple of hundred years to iron out the final details. He brings down in the times of the Gaonim that literally the Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael and the Chachamim of Bavel got together and they said, we need to set rules that are accepted by all of us. Once that happened, the Jewish calendar was born in its entirety. Okay? And since that day, Baruch Hashem, you have an app for that, as they say, right? You have Luach, a wonderful app. If you have it on your phone, you just open it up. You want to know what day is today. You want to know when Purim is. You want to know when Pesach is. Everything is figured out to a T. But if you know these tiny rules, the tiny rules of Lo Ad Rosh I forget I have a terrible memory for the details. Molad Zaken Al Tidrosh. There's a couple of others, again, I'm not getting into it. If you know them, and you know how to calculate the Molad, you can recreate from that the entire Jewish calendar. Okay? So even if you have no app, and even if you have no Jewish calendar, even if you have access to nothing, but you know the basic rules and the basic calculations, you can calculate for yourself the entire Jewish calendar from scratch. Right? And that's an amazing thing. So, what is the importance of all this? What's the importance of the Jewish calendar? What's going on behind it? What's going on behind it is we need to figure out how to do Ratzon Hashem, obviously. To do Ratzon Hashem, we need to live simultaneously by the lunar year and the solar year and figure out how to make them work together. Okay? Add a month here, not add a month there. Play with days here, play with days there. For that reason, the Jewish calendar has two possibilities. Right? I'm going to almost end with this. You can either have roughly 354 days. What do I mean roughly 354 days? Because you can have 353 or you can have 355. Okay? You can have roughly 384 days in a year, or you can have 383 or 385. Okay? All of these little calculations, right? When you add a month, you add 30 days. So therefore it changes from 354 to 384. You also have 2 months in the Jewish calendar, this is very important to know. Cheshvan and Kislev are swing months. They're the only swing months in the calendar. What's the swing? Every month is, as we said before, either 29 days or 30 days. Except for Cheshvan and Kislev. Cheshvan and Kislev are the only ones that can either be both 29, they can both be 30, or one can be 29 and one can be 30. Those are swing months. Those are the days, those are the months that you play with in order to balance out the calendar by the Jewish year. Why are we doing all of this? We're doing all of this because the solar month isn't precise. The solar year isn't precise. The lunar month isn't precise. And in order to balance out the average with the reality, you have to be able to play with the integers enough that makes the reality fit the halacha. Okay? So, in summary, in order to make this work, you got to be a genius. And Baruch Hashem, the sign of a genius throughout Jewish history was the Jewish people. Okay? Again, this is all to balance out the names of the Chagim, as they're called, Chag HaAviv, Chag HaMetzir. All of these things should happen at these precise times for a reason which I'm not getting into now. Right? And when we do this thing, says the Torah, Ushmartem v'asitem ki hi chokmatchem b'netchem l'nei amim. The calculations and the understanding and the knowledge that the Jewish people have for our understanding of how to work the heavens together with the earth is what made us into the wise people that throughout history we've been respected for. Okay? There's a lot more depth to this, right? I just gave you everything on, as they say in Hebrew, al-qsam leg, just the tip of the fork, because I want you to have a basic understanding of what goes on in your calendar, what goes on in your year, what goes on in your life. So Be'ezrat Hashem, with this understanding, go and live a nice Jewish life and understand how we're all connected to the Ribono Shel Olam. We have the power together, vested in us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to take something which is not Kodesh and make it Kodesh. You have the power. We are given, as the Jewish people, the power to decide when Hashem's Moadim are. Right? The Moed of Pesach, you eat Chametz on Pesach, you're Chayav Kares. But you know what? If Beis Din decides it's not Pesach today, it's not Pesach today. They can push it off by a day. Or they can make it come earlier by a day, depending on all their calculations. All of that was given to us because we have a partnership with the Ribono Shel Olam, and Be'ezrat Hashem, understanding your partnership with the Ribono Shel Olam will make your life deeper and better. Slava.